Okay, good morning. Thanks for coming to PhotoTech Day number 18. Today we're very happy to have two speakers with us. We'll start with Uwe Steinmüller of Digital Outback Photo and follow up with Fabio Riccardi of Lightcraft, and their topics are all integrated and they've got a great presentation for you. Uwe, take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, I will introduce myself during the presentation. Maybe Fabio says a short. You want to say something now about your person, what you're doing?
I am the CTO and founder of Lightcraft. I will have my little presentation after Uwe's, so you'll hear about me a little bit later. Is that enough for the moment?
It's up to you. Okay. The talk is, as I say, a bunch of buzzwords: non-destructive, selective, non-linear, and non-modal editing of photographs. So, of course, you know, these are just buzzwords, and I hope at least I make a point that the future of editing is a lot around these topics. Solve them. But for that, we have to understand what it means to, what all these buzzwords mean. Just briefly, the program, it is global or local editing. That's kind of the key. Just a brief overview about the general editing workflow. Why is selective editing needed? It is not obvious for many, many people. They think they can get along with just pushing a couple of sliders, and they think they get their memory back, why they shot an image. Then I talk a little bit how to realize these selective editing. Then I talk briefly about what is non-destructive editing means. It's then, at that point, maybe quite easy to understand. And I just touch non-modal and non-linear. It is kind of an extension on it. So just introduce my person. I'm the editor and owner of Digital Outback Photo and recently also Outback Print. These are websites which are dedicated to fine art photography. One is more on the photographic camera side, tools side. The other side is more on the printer side. The reason I split it was because I want to talk also about very esoteric things on the printing side. And this is not for everyone. We get about 6 million visitors per year. The main business is selling electronic books, which are write about digital workflow, from raw to print. There are also a couple of printed books now out, which I authored, but the main thing is my electronic books. I think I can claim that I probably wrote the first dedicated raw book in the world, ever. I think so. At least I didn't find one before. It was a PDF in 2002, or not 2003, I think. I wrote. No, 2002, for sure. Okay, so to understand selective, we need to understand global. Global means it is the whole area of the image is treated equal. Classic tools for global operations are levels and curves, which treat every pixel the same. If it has a certain pixel value, it will be treated the same wherever it is. That may sound okay to you. We will explain why it is not quite as obvious as it looks. Selective is just the opposite, which means you decide by certain means which areas of the image are corrected. And this is done in most cases by some sort of masking. How these masks are created, I will scratch that a little bit. So let's start with a demonstration, because that's probably how to escape. Yes. Okay. Because that shows most easily why there may be a need for selective editing. This is a shot we did in Utah. It is kind of a pale grass, and you have the red rocks in the background. So I don't want to go to Lightzone in all the steps. I just want to show what I did in principle on that image and where I think selective editing made a huge difference on it. So what you do always in editing is you use some global corrections, like this one here. Let me zoom a little bit down. And this is the first time I use a mask on that image, because what happens is the grass needs to stay soft because it has a soft, pale structure. On the other hand, the red rocks are on the distance, they are in the haze, so they need different treatment than the grass. There's no way to treat the grass with the same means as the red rocks. And just give you an idea that you just see, I think even on this screen you can see that it's a huge difference. So what is actually done here, it is not just a mask which has a sharp edge, it is a mask with a, with a gradient where it has a feather area where it gets from non-effective to effective, so it gradually gets there. And this may be a little bit small feathering area, but just giving you the idea. The same is then used for treating the saturation of the rocks a little bit. That's subtle. You may hardly see it. But it gives you the idea that you may want to boost up the saturation of red rocks, because in our memories, red rocks are red. Yeah? But the pale grass, if I boost up the saturation on the pale grass, I may get the color which I don't want. So I want to treat it differently. You know, the rest is then some additional operations. This is just to give you an idea where there's no way to treat, well, you know, there's always a way, but it would come down to some sort of selective editing to treat the grass and the red rocks in a different way. And honestly, it's kind of an unfair comparison now, but if you go back to where we started, to this, it gives you the idea how you can put emphasis on some area of the image using selective technique. And a very simple way. This is trivial. And you know, just get back to this one area here. If I want to have the feather area bigger, actually, you know, now I lose something, so I have to widen it. It is done in minutes to change the feather area, so that's a soft transition, so that your eyes don't see that there is actually a mask effective. Feel free to ask questions anytime. Okay. So this was kind of introduction to, I first had a slide on it, but you know, it's probably better shown in a sample why you want selective editing. And I had last year in our summit in Page, at least 3 times the experience that someone said, I want it simple. And I could not agree more with that person, but simple meant for him, I don't want selective editing. And it took me about 5 minutes in all cases to make a point that they wanted selective editing because they couldn't reach what they actually wanted out of the image. No, sorry. So this is just summarizing what the normal editing process all involves. There are many, many steps, and this is not by no means complete. The first is normally the raw processing level. Then you work on a global level, the tonality on a global level, the colors on a global level. You deal with noise removal, sharpening. You deal with lens and perspective corrections. You remove dust and blemishes. You use more advanced controls, which are adaptive, like shadow highlight or the Lightzone tone mapper. But then, at kind of most of the cases, the last step, you go into selective. You say, what am I missing on that image? What is wrong about this image if I think of presenting it. Where is the story in that image? And that's very often related, that you want to tell something with that image. And if you don't work on some areas of that image and improve them, you don't tell the story. And the last one is selective color corrections. OK. One reason, and that's a very important, yeah?
What are you calling selective editing exactly? Like if you remove extra junk from an image, is that selective editing?
Very, very selective, yes. If you, the infamous Coke bottle in the landscape, which can give you a discussion on the internet for years, whether it's legal, it's a photograph, you know. Stephen Johnson, I think he was last week here, he would say, then you are a manipulator. I wouldn't care to remove a Coke bottle in a blink from something. So yeah, everything which is not just global, treating everything as is. But this gets now more into compositing of images, and that's not what I mean. I mean more, and I get to that soon, in the sense of dodge and burn, of selective enhancing images. And in some way, of course, the Coke bottle in the landscape is enhancing the image if it distracts you. So the first most important thing is that your eyes work selective. You are not like a camera looking at a scene and say, OK, capture it, that's dark, I treat everything the same. The camera is just saying, how many photons reach me at that pixel? Your eyes look at things and go into it. They zoom into it. They look different, and we come to that in a minute. But then there are things like flaws, the haze I mentioned in that image. The corners could be soft focused, so you want the corners a little bit more sharpened than the center, is already something selective. You have uneven light. Unfortunately, it's nearly always uneven. You have different color balances in an image. I show later a sample where I use it artistically to do different white balancing on different areas of the image. And nearly every scene you ever see in nature has different white points. There's a sun, there's a sky. You have, most of the time, always two light sources. And they have completely different white balance. And one thing is, the blue shadows, your eyes don't see that much blue shadows, but the camera sees like hell. So you want to get close what the eye sees. The eye sees a little bit bluisher than the rest, but the camera sees it really blue. Yeah, and I see many prints where they have plain blue in the shadows. I don't think I remember it that way. Or you want to, and I show one example of that, you want to draw attention to an image element. The key thing is, and that's where I actually met Lightzone at some point, is it is the old classic concept of dodge and burn. Dodge and burn is you brighten or darken areas in an image. This is done, I don't know, way over 100 years. Yeah? It's a classic technique. Every classic black and white photographer uses dodge and burn. You can say selective editing is dodge and burn now in the digital domain. You can do more things. But you know, dodge and burn also included that they changed the colors of the projector, of the printer, for certain areas to get more contrast, whatever. So this is an old technique. And this is actually where I say your eye looks selective. The two rows of dots are exactly the same on right and left. But if you have a bright dot in a dark background, it looks so much brighter than on a white background. And the opposite is true for the dark dots. This is how your eyes look. So it's not fooled. It's hard to believe that this dot has exactly the same brightness as this one. And this looks so much brighter than this, but it's exactly the same. And this we have to account for. So that's why you have to work in the shadows different than in the highlights. And if you do it just globally, a curve would change both dots, this one and this one, in exactly the same manner. But for the eyes, it would do harm because it would overstress. This one makes it too harsh, and this one too soft. This is, I'm never sure whether really this slide is appreciated, but you know, in editing, we talk about shadows. The funny thing is that we don't talk about shadows, we talk about dark pixels. And that's why I like this photo, because the interesting thing is this is shadow, and these are dark pixels. Actually, interesting, the dark pixels are darker than the shadows in terms of pixel values. So if you want to open the shadows, you definitely not want to brighten these black numbers, because they are black by nature, and they are in bright sun. They are not in any shadow. They just have a low value of brightness. And here we have a real shadow. And if you look into this image, you will look at it. I don't know what I did with it, but you would see also the blueness in the shadows. I probably removed it to a certain degree. So that's important to know. Our eyes really treat shadows differently than highlight. They actually adjust to it. They ignore the blue cast and say, it's not really that blue. Yeah? So you don't see it. Yeah? OK, the next sample I wanted to do in Lightzone is just to show you how a small image element I hide the mask. In this image, I'm not really sure, because this is not my image. I got it at the last summit. It was a real world, in real time decision editing. Let's go a little bit bigger. The problem with the image, and it's maybe a little bit hard to see on the screen, is that this little bush stuff is kind of diffuse. It's kind of it lacks some sort of focus. So what I did is actually darken it a little bit. And the interesting thing is, when you would see it printed, you would never believe it was not that way before. Yeah? So it's a little bit difficult on the screen. If you would see it on this screen and on the print, it's a world of difference in a subtle way. You know, it's not, that's what selective editing is about. You know, you see? And then I actually did the opposite. I took a smaller circle. You see, these are now the masks related to these operations. Again, with a soft feathering area. So what you do is sometimes darken the center can help. Sometimes darken the corner can help. It's a classic way to draw the attention to the center of an image. So you can play with elements in the image where you want attention, which has nothing to do with an image flaw or something like that. It is something what you want to tell the story. And it tells sometimes very different stories. If, for example, if you realize you look at the image, you wander with your eyes everywhere, think of giving it a focus by darkening, getting more different color, more saturation, or whatever, to a selective area of the image. So, oh, what was that? So how do we create a selective area? We can create it by geometric shapes. We can select by tonal range. We could select by color range. We could paint masks. What is this here? Or we can have some algorithmic way. Is it this one here? Okay. Okay. So But now the question, how do we organize that? If we do selective editing, we cannot just have a bunch of sliders sitting around. We have to organize it in a way that we say, OK, this works on that area, this works on another area. So the classic model, and I think it has proven to be very valid, is kind of a layer model. Or you could also say it's an operation stack layer. And each of these layers has associated masks with it. Blending modes, it's just a side note. The Photoshop layer model is mainly a pixel-based layer, which has the advantage, it has a very fine granularity, but it has a big disadvantage. It is opaque in a way that if you want to change one of these layers, all on top are ruined. You cannot change just one layer and hope the rest is done. There are exceptions, which is called adjustment layers, but so they are destructive. The Lightzone layer model is more an operation layer model, which says you have an operation which has what they call regions, but it's essentially a mask attached. And they are all functional all the time. There's no things like freezing it into pixels. It's all from bottom to top. What I showed is always done in real time from bottom to top through the layers model. They have geometric masks with feather ranges, which I showed. And all operations are non-destructive. I spend one more slide later on non-destructive. Non-destructive means the underlying image is not changed. There is nothing like in between pixels. There's nothing burned into the original image. It's just a bunch of operations which are on top of it. This is more a side note, but I couldn't resist to say that. When you work in many editing programs, in today's raw converters especially, you have many, many sliders. Let's assume you want to come back and find out what you did. You actually have to reverse engineer what you changed and what was the default, because it's just a bunch of sliders. In a layer model, you document what you do. If there is no layer, you didn't do it. That's very easy. And in the end, it's equivalent, because in the layer model, you do something, and it's non-destructive if you have non-destructive layers. So I think these documenting what you do is a very important aspect, because you want to understand what we already did to the image and what you may want to change. This is now the last sample image, which shows a little bit larger So here's, for example, a good example. This little corner here is completely distracting the image. It's a very little thing, yeah? But it is a major issue for this image. You see, I just changed, let me switch off the masks. But you see, just get the idea that this is destructive in terms of to our eyes, because your attention would always go to this white little thing, which is kind of irrelevant for the image. You just toned it down a little bit, burned it, and you got the solution. The other thing is what I did, and now I show mask, is I did white balance for the shadow areas differently than for the highlight areas. So I've gone through that. For example, look at this bright in the middle. The bright in the middle was, again, one of these things which were overly bright. It took too much attention. Yeah? And of course, we are here at a point where it's a matter of taste. It is nothing absolute. It's an artistic decision what you want to do with it. But you want to decide how much the center is distracting from the image. And then we did white balance on the inner side of it and some final sharpening. It's unfortunate that we don't have much more time. Oh, that's interesting. iTunes. Declined, yeah. OK. It's Fabio's computer, so I understand. So now, yeah?
In Photoshop, every layer is fairly memory heavy.
Yes.
How is that in?
That's more the implementation. It's also probably because they do some tricky caching. Yeah.
But in Photoshop, when you save it, every layer basically saves all the pixels. So you start from an image that's a raw file of 10, 15 megabytes, and then you end up in a few hundred megabytes of PSD file. In Lightzone, we only save the virtual layer, so the operations that are in that layer. So it's a piece of XML of a few bytes. So it doesn't take any space on the hard drive. Of course, in memory, you will have to, we have to cache the layers and do things that make the thing appear fast. So we use very effectively the memory inside your machine. So we use all of it. But
the layer, the question asked was, aren't the layers in Photoshop quite memory heavy? Or actually, they are memory and disk heavy. Because it's a pixel layer, and there's no way to go around that. You cannot describe all the pixels in an image by an algorithm. That's hard. Probably you can't. Yeah? So it is true that it is very expensive. So when I work in Photoshop on one of these images, I start at 300 megabyte. That's kind of when I wake up with layers. And you easily get, with stitched images, to 2 gigabyte in weight. So it is, but that said, it's one way to deal with this problem. I just want to show what it means. Non-modal. Non-modal means you can jump from one operation or one layer to the other without a dialog. Open the dialog, do something, close it, wait. You wait here too, because it has to do things. It does a new sharpening on something. But you can immediately go there. You can immediately switch layers. You get different results in some cases, not in all cases. So non-modal means it helps you in the flow of editing images. It is not in your way. It's a software principle. Modal dialogues are the death of interactivity, just period. And they make all sense in preferences or something like that. But during a workflow, they are in your way. Yeah? And nonlinear means you can change things, rearrange things, and jump wherever you want. So if your eye is saying, I want to change the white balance, you go to the white balance layer, yeah, and change it without, as said, opening a dialog, doing something. It is in your way to explore that image. It works fine, but it is, you have to more pre-think what you want to do and then do it. Here you explore what you want to do and might find things you never thought of you wanted to do.
Okay, well, this is fine, but this is still very limiting in that the corrections I find myself doing most of the time are things like correcting lens ghosting or things which involve cloning and replicating parts of the image. How do you do that in this
Interesting. You do most of the time deal with lens ghosting?
Lens ghosting or removing dust or like that.
It has a dust tool, but that's
well, it doesn't work.
why doesn't it work?
It's, doesn't do a good job.
Oh, I can show you prints in 30-inch wide with about 50, 60 dust spots, and it's pretty good. So, but you know, that gets into an argument. You understand it? But lens ghosting, you know, I took 35,000 raw files since 2000. I think I didn't correct one lens ghosting because I don't get it, because I avoid it to start with. It doesn't mean it doesn't make sense. And it's also not the point that I say this kind of editing is for everything on the planet. I didn't say that. Yeah?
My question is that because you do want to do this kind of editing, and you have a need for it, how do you integrate this into the
I leave, if you want, the non-destructive path. I create a TIFF file, go into Photoshop, and do whatever would be needed to do that.
And then you've lost pretty much all the advantages of non-destructive editing.
No, not really. For example, you can also do the following. You first correct it, and then go into Lightzone from TIFF. It's the same possibility. It's just you cannot have everything. I understand, it's true. But I use tools when they fit. For example, in the moment when I want to do lens distortion, I may use a tool and do it in Photoshop and then go to Lightzone afterward. It's still, you can benefit from it. And it's, you know, it's still fine if you prepare it to a certain level and then do perfection somewhere else.
Well, you have to be very methodical when doing that, because normally what I find is, you know, I do some global or multi-global correctors, like what I do. Then I notice something wrong with the image. I want to fix it, and then I want to fix the global corrections again. And the two workflows just don't work together very well.
But you don't have more problems than just working in Photoshop, so I don't see that point. You just have one level of working with things. If you have that, you know, your lens ghosting, which is kind of but I think just may I stop that, because that's a matter of taste, and you cannot argue on that really. There's nothing like the perfect tool, but we know that. So just briefly, non-destructive editing. So you have actually, you start with an image, and you have a bunch of operations. Benefits, space, you can make changes later. Once you have to nail it to a pixel level image, you have to redo whatever you did afterwards. Why is not all editing non-destructive? Computing limitations. Not all operations are easy to map into this model. Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah? But they are also the annoying operations in other editing programs where you have to wait. Is non-destructive editing the future? Yes, very clearly. Lightzone took it one step further than before. There were actually, what was it, live picture? There was actually one application in the ancient history of photo editing in the beginning of the 90s, which had kind of an operation stack, but it was, because of the computing power was so low, that people did all the editing at a low-res image and then waited to do it on the full-size image. It's kind of the same idea, but it is now in the interactive visual editing domain. My prediction is in 2 years, if your raw converter doesn't do selective editing, it won't be really a hit on the market. Yeah, just, I come to you in a minute. Challenges, you know, no surprise, computing speed, you have to do in real time or kind of real time. Expensive operation, that's already today. If people work on a raw converter, let's assume you come to a raw converter developer and say, you have the genius, world best algorithm. It just takes 5 minutes to execute. He doesn't even look at you because he knows his users will kill him because they say, oh, that's so slow. Of course, if it would be really the world best, they would do it later and wait 5 minutes. Yeah? But you cannot incorporate in something very expensive operation. That just doesn't fly. You have to stay compatible with older controls. So what about this deck, reading it in 10 years? Integration with other applications, and that's what you got into. And there's no standard tools or a standard on how layers are described. So sorry, you.
I just wanted to make a comment on your inevitability of this being the future, and that is that in 3D modeling, this same transformation occurred probably, I don't know, 5 years ago, where they basically, like 3ds Max revolutionized things by having a stack of operations that occur on your objects that you can go back and modify. So I think it's probably a likely thing. It will be the future. But
yeah, the question was, or it was more a comment, was that in 3D editing, this move was done about 5 years ago. So the idea is as old as anything. People probably knew in the 80s that they wanted to do it. But they didn't have the computers, they didn't have the model, they didn't have the user interface, they didn't have anything to do it. Yeah, so I'm kind of surprised, honestly, that Lightzone is the first to go that step. Yeah, but this also shows it's not just trivial. It's not just, okay, let's start and do it. Yeah, the thing is, this damn stupid machine has to work pretty fast to do it. Yeah, but that's kind of what I see. Integration with other applications. Yeah, so it's all yours, or actually, Fabio.
There are questions before my?
Yeah, so while you're setting up, so if there are other questions. Okay, fine with me.
Okay, so my talk comes after Uwe's. Uwe's did a very good job at illustrating why Lightzone is good and everything. So I will shorten up my thing and try to stay to a few points. Who is Fabio? This is me. I have a background. I'm the CTO and founder of Lightcrafts, which is the company that does Lightzone. I have a background in electrical engineering, particle physics. I worked at CERN when we invented the web down there, and computer science. I worked on particle detectors in my life, large-scale distributed real-time systems, and lots of signal processing. This is my second startup. I sold another company to BA Systems a few years ago. And while I was working there, you go from a small startup to a large corporation. It's really exciting. Everybody's got an opinion on what you have to do. So you don't get to do anything anymore. And I got into photography. I founded Lightcrafts in 2004. It's based in Palo Alto. It's privately funded. It's a small company for the moment, but we're going to grow bigger than Google very soon. That's easy, right? You just get a good IPO. What is Lightzone? Lightzone is advanced photo editing made simple. So there are professionals like Uwe that use it in a professional way, but the idea is that anybody should be able to retouch images in a decent way. When I got into photography, I'm a fairly advanced computer user. And I found that retouching images in Photoshop sucks. It sucks not because Photoshop is a bad application or anything like that. It's just it's 20 years old. And it thinks about images in a way that I don't want to think about images. And we'll get into this. Lightzone tries to put together a new approach for a new market, defining what photography actually is in the modern times, and see what are the key elements that photographers want to be able to deal with. Digital photography is very new, after all. Digital photography statistically didn't exist before Canon introduced the Canon Rebel. So if it was a few 100,000 people around the world shooting, big beast cameras that were totally impractical and hugely expensive. When Canon introduced the Rebel in 2003, well, everybody's got a digital camera that's really sophisticated and good, and it's better than what film used to do before. It is largely a virgin market. So there has been, the last 2 or 3 years, lots of hubbub of Apple with Aperture, Lightroom, and Photoshop, and this and that. But if you make the arithmetics, Photoshop only covers probably 4% of the DSL user market. Photoshop is a user base of about 6 million customers in total. Of these, the number of digital photographers are a minority because most of the people are actually doing, the real thing that Photoshop can do, which is graphic artist work. So most people that take images with digital cameras nowadays, either they don't retouch the images or they use the crop software that comes with their camera. Most photographers cannot read a histogram. I've been to lots of photography workshops where there is this guy that takes you on top of Yosemite and you take beautiful pictures, and you've got this lady that bought their Nikon D200 has a histogram on the back, and she's looking at the histogram like this, and then she goes like that, and she cannot make any sense of it. It's a mathematical representation of your image. What is it? With Lightzone, I tried to put together a visual approach to digital photography, where images are not treated as a bucket of numbers, where pixels have got nothing to do with photography. Now, pixels are an accident of the implementation of the fact that you have a computer that treats images with dots. Okay, it's like going after every single grain of film. It's just dumb. Photography is a way of thinking and feeling about the images you're creating, as Uwe has been showing us. And photography tools must talk about photography, not about pixels, not about some numerical representation of this pixel on a range from 0 to 255 on some arbitrary scale. And why do we retouch images? And what Uwe has been showing us is that there is a big discrepancy between the eye and the camera. The eye and the camera see very differently. The eye performs local adaptation of the image. So your photosensors on the retina will talk to each other and try to figure out what the next one is doing and adapt to the scene you're seeing. Because what the eye wants to do is to compress the huge dynamic range that's got of the world outside there and put it in some format that's easy to manipulate for the brain. So you reduce the global contrast range, you enhance the local contrast. You have seen the little image that Uwe showed before with the dots on a white and dark background. That's what the brain does, extracts information out of things. The camera instead, and so the eye works in a logarithmic scale where the big differences are compressed, and it does local adaptation. The camera instead works in a linear scale, no adaptation whatsoever. So you get these stark images that are black and white, and the eye says, well, I didn't see that. So you want to recreate the impression that you had when you actually took that image. Film actually works better than digital cameras because film is an analog process inside there. So it works like tube amplifiers. So whenever you have clipping, if you are an audiophile, with transistors, they go like that because it clips the sound wave. With tubes, you have a soft clipping. And in film, the highlights of your image are softly compressed. Instead, with a digital camera, well, you clip. You go beyond what the CCD could do, and it's gone. It would be great if somebody invents a camera that can drain stuff out of the highlights as they're produced. So basically, we want to recreate the original visual experience, and we want to go beyond the original visual experience by interpreting what we saw. So putting the accent on pieces of the image that are interesting for us. In Lightzone, Uwe didn't show you, but the framework for thinking about your images is 50 years old. So we use the Ansel Adams zone system as a framework for thinking about what you have inside there. The zone system, it's a framework where you can talk about the visual elements in your image in terms of different zones and different light values. And you can think about how you want to rearrange these different visual elements directly in a visual language. I don't want to go into the details of how we do that in Lightzone. It would take too long. But the point is that there is a way of interacting and talking about images differently than just talking about pixel values. So what we do, we take a scene like this one, we break it down into different zones, and with a tool like the zone mapper, we can identify, for instance, the light on the river here, and then find a slider that corresponds to the light of the river, which is the slider that turns the river into yellow, and you bring it up or bring it down. So with very simple operations, you can completely reorganize the light in your image in a logical and photographic way.
How selective is the zone finding? Is it like pixel by pixel basis, or does it look at groups of pixels and look at the average brightness?
Well, it changes the contrast curve of the image. So you can stretch local. So you take the tonal range and you either compress it, stretch it, move it up, move it down. So you do what you want.
Well, you have a zone selected at the insert there.
So this is the way. Let me give you a short time about that. So repeat the question. The question is about how does it really work and what does it actually do? Let me give you an idea of what it actually does. Let's take this image. So this image, I was taken like, I don't remember if it's sunset or dawn. All the valley is very dark. The sky is very bright. I try to keep the entire dynamic range of the image. So if I don't want to blow out the sky, basically the rest comes out dark. So what you want to do is to somehow enhance the brightness of the part of the image and then work on the detail that you've got inside the image. The zone mapper is the tool that we use to rearrange the zones. What you can do, you can explore your image by moving the cursor over the zone mapper. For instance, you want to open up the shadows. You find a part of the shadows. You select it. You bring it up. And this changes globally the image, okay? And changes the shadows in your image. Now, you want to change the light on the river. You find where the river is, and you bring it up. And you see that all the parts of the image that have got that value of lightness come up pretty much like that. So it's very easy to identify which part of the tonal range you want to use and change and do it directly visually. You see that here there is not an histogram. There is no numerical representation. Everything is done by your eyes. Once you get accustomed to these kind of tools, your eyes and your brain do all the work, and you have to think about numerical values. When you have to think about numerical values, there is something that disrupts your thought process continuously, and you go back and forth into something that distracts you from your feelings if you want.
Does this work like the curves in Photoshop, or does it work like shadows and highlights in Photoshop?
It works like curves. So beyond the zone system, what you want to do is, the eye, first you have systematically have to bridge the gap between what your eye saw and then what the camera is seeing. And then you want to work your image and retouch it and add your artistic interpretation to that. So instead of doing all the boring work of your brain by hand, you can have better tools. So in Lightzone, we have a tool that is called the tone mapper. The tone mapper works if you want like shadows, highlights in Photoshop, but it actually works. So if you try to work with shadows, highlights, you get fairly so-and-so result. Because the algorithms that they use inside there are not very sophisticated. In Lightzone, we put together a tone mapper. It's really powerful. And the tone mapper reconstructs what your eye actually sees in real life. So it interprets the image, finds out where the shadow areas are, brings up a result while keeping down the highlights. And it has sophisticated masking techniques inside. And you can change the highlights, the shadows, and local contrast in very fine detail. And then on top of it, you start adding artistic interpretation. So now I want to put the accent on the river, and I just work on the tonal range of the river, or on the tonal range of the mountains. So you can adjust the detail of the work. So you can go very quickly from an image that was like forget it, to an image that starts to look like something. So the future is in automating as much as possible, all the basic difference between what the eye saw and what the camera says, and then give freedom to artistic interpretation for the photographer. So what the technique we use, it's tone mapping at the base for the geeks, but what really is imagery lighting. You can take images when there is no light. You go to a workshop with your photographers. You have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and by 8 you're done because that's where the light is. Then nothing happens for the rest of the day, and then at 5 p.m. you go somewhere, and now by 8 you want to take some pictures because there is light again. well, if you can relight your image, if you can change the nature of the image the nature of the light in your image, you can take images all the time, even when there is no light. And you can be, you know, an artist photographer, or you can just take family snapshots. I have a few images of my son. This is a fashion show that was organized for children. I go there with my expensive camera and I take this kind of crap. So, you know, you want to be able to make some sense out of it. So how did I see this thing at the time? I saw it like this. Well, on this screen, the contrast is exaggerated. But you see that there is a way of going from what the camera sees to what the eye sees, basically with one single slide.
What does this tone mapper actually do?
It takes too long to explain right now. But what it does, it really mimics what the eye does. We put the camera, the image in a representation that's close to that of the eye. It understands the differences between different tonal elements and grouping of elements in the image, and basically reconstructs the light on the image. You can completely change the nature of the light. You can go from soft light, harsh light, you know, reorganize, you know, the way the sound worked that day.
You know, in the HDR world, in the high dynamic range world, there is this whole realm of what is called tone mappers. And this is not called tone mapper incidentally. This is how you map the light of an image, in case of HDR, from a huge range of light into a manageable light which could be printed. You know, printed you get maybe a ratio of 1 to 250 if you have on glossy paper. In matte you may get 1 to 50 as a dynamic range. And the tone mappers we will see over the next years, many of them, there are already probably very sophisticated algorithms which you probably need a cray to run overnight to get something done. This is done in real time. So this is where many people work on how we map what we see to what the camera sees to what we see.
I understand what the problem is. I face it all the time. I'm curious, what does this actually do?
He does a good job. That's the
Well,
interesting part.
what I do, I'm not going to tell you, because, you know, I sell it. I think, I mean, working a lot on this thing, what's really complicated actually is making it fast. How do I do it this quick? Because, you know, other people can do things similar like that, but, you know, it takes a long time. This is interactive tone mapping. So my talk finishes here. If you guys have questions, this is probably a good time.
So, more question, or do we get thrown out?
We have time for questions.
You know, at the end, you know, the visual system is part of our, it's not part of the thinking part of the brain. So it's a physical experience. So, yeah.
So, I mean, tone mapping is very nice. I understand very little of it. But if you say 4% of DSLR users use Photoshop, I'd be amazed if even 1% use zone system.
Sure.
So what was the motivation to go to zone system?
Well, the zone system, first of all, you know, the old zone system
repeat
was...
the question.
So only the zone system is some esoteric technology that could be even more complicated than Photoshop to grasp. This is true if you go in the zone system of the darkroom and stuff like that. But the zone system is just a way of talking about your images. So if you have to think about a UI that allows you to manipulate your image, well, there are people that have been thinking about, okay, how do I talk about my image? So the zone system is just a language. And you don't have to go into the details and the complexity of the zone system. Normally people just, you know, see the zone mapper in front of them, start changing it, and that's it.
You know, when Dick asked me about the talk, I want to talk about selective editing. How many people do selective editing? It's probably 0.1%, but they may need to be educated. When I started writing using RAW, it was a tiny group. You could really number them on the planet. Today, New York Times writes about RAW. RAW is like, you know, the hip thing to do. For me, it's already the past. You know, I get the next step, which means go beyond that. RAW is done. it's just there, and you use it, yeah? But it is an educating process, and the educating process needs to start, and it starts here today. So that's the point. But I agree, there's a lot to do, but people have to see what they miss. If they don't ever see that, you know, I agree with them. Why bother? Yeah.
You can expect that many of these things that now you can do in software and you do it as post-processing, probably the camera will do in the next 4 or 5 years.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much.